we're so excited to bring on a team behind Immortal Weakling, the creator Yaruno, and the editor Tyler Beckett. And we're so excited to learn a little bit more about them, about how the process works from starting off from canvas and then eventually becoming an original series. It's a way to look at your work objectively and gauge what changes could be made to benefit your overall story. And also from this workshop, you'll be having a little special insight about the edits and creative changes that are made throughout a series lifespan. So excited to bring them on, Bruno and Tyler.
Hi all.
Oh, how are you
Good to join you
two?
here.
Yes, we're so happy to have you. How are you guys feeling?
I'm good. I'm very excited to talk about our journey from Immortal Weakling because a lot changed. And when I was on Canvas, I often had questions like, what is it like to have an original, and like how you grow into that, and stuff. So I think it'll be a very cool workshop. I'm glad I can talk about the process basically.
Yes, we're so happy to have you. So before we get started, I think something that we'd love to hear about is to hear from Tyler and what exactly about Yaruna's story stood out to you.
Absolutely. So I know for me personally, I'm already a big fan of superhero stories. And we had this story going on the platform with Immortal Weakling that had immediate ways that set itself apart and its own unique voice and style, also weird powers and the central concept that I hadn't seen before. For those who aren't familiar, and Yarno, I apologize if I'm stealing your thunder on this one, on the summary. But like the main character, the Immortal Weakling, is such a good healer that it ends up being a self-healer, that it's a detriment to him, that he's unable to grow stronger, and that it makes him the weakest person in a world of superpowered people. That immediately caught my attention. In addition to great art, a story, and pair of creators who had just created this organically and found a large following, that's really cool and inspiring for me. So the appeal of the story, the appeal of the art, the great humor throughout, all these things were speaking to me and the other editors from the very beginning. And it was really exciting when I learned that I did get to work with Yaruno and Steven on this project.
Well, that's amazing. Yaruno, on your end, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you felt when you were, greenlit and when you first started working with Tyler. What was that process like?
Well, at first I was very excited because I published a lot of different comics on Canvas and have been on the platform for a long time. And it was always my dream to make an original series. So then when we got contacted for Immortal, I was incredibly excited. And I instantly started to think oh no, editors are going to look at the series and all the little flaws really start to jump out. And I was like, oh no, I have to change this and change that and stuff. But then once I started talking to Tyler, I was really excited to see how on the same wavelength we were, and how it was much easier to workshop ideas together, spot mistakes, show directions I hadn't thought of yet, and stuff. So in general, the experience of working with an editor has been even better than I actually had expected, because I was a little scared that an editor could be like, oh no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this or something. But Tyler is the complete opposite. It's more or we could also do this, or this could be an option, or maybe we can also add this to it. And it's always given more options basically, and then we just select together which direction we think is best.
And I also want to say how easy you make it, Yarno. I mean, you came in with so many clear ideas about what your next step would be. With all the experience you mentioned you had on the platform, you had time to evaluate your story, say this is what you liked from the first Canvas version, and this is what you thought could be even better. I thought that made it really easy for me to just come in and join a project where you're like, oh, here's the cool things we're going to do. And I was like, fantastic. I love this, making it easy for me.
I think that's really amazing that you guys have such a good, cohesive work relationship when creating your series, because I know that's so essential to being able to make the proper edits and really being able to tell a story. Could either of you talk a bit more about what were some big changes that you might have made to the story from the get-go, and what that experience looked like, and how did you two collaborate to make those changes happen?
No, I can start off basically by, when I got contacted, I already had in mind a few changes I wanted to make. So when pitching the story, I already like selected, like I'm definitely going to change this or add depth here and stuff. And I think the core is that changing a story has many different layers. For example, the first test in both versions of the series is a sniper who shoots at the candidates from afar, and they have to like use their powers to counter that. But I'll just like show quickly on the presentation, the way they look in the canvas version and the original is completely different, and it's changed, but it also didn't change because it's still the same core concept, but it's grown. There's more obstacles along the way. There was more depth added. I explored like how can I expand side characters in this test and stuff. So like changing your story doesn't necessarily mean changing it in the way you expect, like going a different direction. You can go exactly the same direction, but execute it differently as well to change things up, for example. So then the first step I did was select like which things do I want to change completely, which was the start of the series, is something that I changed quite a lot. The canvas version started with a bit of narration, and then Taya and Nerin met each other in a random robbery that happened, and then they kind of became a duo, but it was rather separated from the rest of the story. So now in the original version, I thought, what if that is their introduction to the hero test? To give some more backstory to Nerin, we can have it take place in a hospital where she's doing her internship. So basically, it's again a same idea. Taya and Nerin meet each other during a certain event that happens, but you just interconnect it a little bit better and execute it differently to make these changes. Also, Siven's art grew a ton from the canvas version to this one. So those are also big changes that were made.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, a great description of what it was. You, in a lot of cases, chose to streamline and unite elements of the story that were already there, or maybe a little bit more spread out or in different scenes, and said, how can we unify these details so that one flows directly from the next? It's the meeting of the protagonist leads directly to the hero tests, which leads directly into all their growth and challenges. It's just one thing connecting to the next. And that's just a really good way to make all of your details have greater impact. So I thought that was a very smart thing that you chose to do going into this version.
Yeah, Yaruno, when you talked, it was, I think a lot of the people here can really see like the improvement from Canvas to Originals. And I'm seeing a lot of people just saying the readability is amazing, the layout's amazing, just it really is incredible, the improvement that you were able to make. And also, Tyler, when you talked, I think it's just so obvious your expertise when it comes to editing and storytelling. Do you have any general like tips or maybe points that creators should always kind of keep in mind, remember when they are kind of objectively reviewing their own series?
Absolutely. So one thing I want to encourage is something I'm seeing in the stage chat right now as people talking about finding editors. I think a really cool thing you can do as a group is also form community with each other, maybe through the Discord that's going around, but maybe offer to be each other's editors sometimes when you find someone else that you like and admire their work. I think editing has been great for my own personal artistic creative development, but is really, really good at making you think critically about what you like and what can be improved in work. Because sometimes when I'm reading, say, a script or an early draft of an episode, I find myself thinking, I really like this part, but I don't know why. Or this isn't quite doing it for me yet. What is going on? And struggling to put that into words has been really, really good for forcing me sometimes to actually consider the bit parts of this feeling, this experience, so that I can identify the traits that are working in the series and then be clearer in the kind of feedback I give. Because one of the things we talk about amongst editors is making sure that we are identifying issues, for instance, and not first going to offering solutions. And what I mean by that is in my notes, I try and say, hey, this thing here could be doing more. Identifying the problem first and then saying, here's why I think and then saying, and here's some potential solutions. The reason being, one, I may not be right about my solutions. I may be on a completely different track from the creator, but if you identify the problems first and do it clearly, then that gives the creator the chance to come up with the better solutions themselves and for everyone to get on the same page. It is a job, a lot of focus on communication, so I think that is a big part of it. So if you choose to edit for each other or take this perspective on yourself, just turn your editorial gaze to your own work, I would say try and write out or explain out loud, however you prefer, what is working or what isn't working, what maybe your favorite scene is doing well, and getting into the nitty-gritty there. In addition, as far as reviewing your own work, I great to go back and evaluate what you're doing. I don't want to encourage people to be too hard on themselves, because there are sometimes people will be creating for, say, 2 or 3 years on Canvas, and then they go back and look at their first episode and they can see how clearly they have grown over 2 or 3 years, which is encouraging and great, but can also lead people to say, I can't believe the gap between where I am now and where I was then. This could be a problem. And I'll say, most readers don't feel that way. Editors certainly don't feel that way. Artists generally know you're supposed to be growing and changing over time. I would not stress about the old material. I would try and use it as growth for yourself to be building to the next thing. So definitely reviewing your material, definitely looking at your old art and your old episodes, but less from a place to critique and feel some kind of way about where you were, and instead to think about what you can be doing going forward. I think that covers or addresses the question, but I talked a lot, so I think I'll turn it back over.
No, that was great. I actually also have a question for you, Bruno. I think that opening yourself up to feedback can sometimes be really challenging, but from the way that you've spoken, I think that you've done an amazing job of opening yourself up to everything your editor and readers might have to say. I wonder if you have any advice for someone who might be wanting to have their series reviewed, but is scared to hear feedback or to be able to implement it.
Well, feedback is never easy. Like I sometimes, when I write, for example, a script, then in my head it has already happened. It's like, okay, the story is set. But then Tyler is sometimes like, oh, but here this could be better. And at first, I always have like the defensive reaction of like, no, I don't want to change it. I like it how it is. But then when you just like try to calm down and think about it, and then I often get new ideas based on what Tyler said, and I see, okay, this can enhance the story, and then you basically have to trust the person you're working with, but also be able to admit to yourself that you're not perfect. Like no one is perfect. I'm never gonna write a perfect story. It can always be improved, and that's something that is crucial when making comics. Like when I go back to, again, also for example, the Canvas version of Immortal Weakling, there are mistakes in there, and you can grow from them. Like even for this presentation, when I went back to Canvas, I noticed a lot of things like, oh, actually, this is the same idea, but I added this and this and this to it. So maybe for future writing, that can also be interesting to like keep that and that and that in mind. So like you can always learn more basically from your own writing, from other people's writing. Like Tyler said, getting a friend to have a look at your series is always a great help. I've had Little Bobbler, the creator of The Wildlands, also a WEBTOON original at the moment, is someone who often looks at pitches for me or scripts or something, and I do the same for him, because yeah, we worked together on Canvas on a project, and we understand each other, and it's nice to have like a person you trust to give feedback on. I would also give the advice to not ask feedback to too many people at once. If you ask 20 or 30 people for feedback, then it'll be very chaotic for you, because some people will say A, some people will say B, and you might want to please everyone, and then your voice will be lost and it'll go nowhere. So like try to do it one person at a time, someone you really trust, and then yeah, you can like try and grow from there, learn from there. And the important thing about feedback is also you can still interpret feedback. Like when Tyler says, oh, maybe they could do action A here. But I would say, oh, but maybe with action B, we can have actually the same thing would happen, but in a slightly different way. So it's not because Tyler says you have to do A that I do A. I just see like, oh, Tyler says this to enhance this part, but maybe this part can also be enhanced in a slightly different way. So feedback isn't something set in stone that you have to do. It's something you can learn from and interpret in your own way and implement it in your own way. And best of all, I think you also implement it together with the person who gave the feedback. You don't want a person who just gives feedback and then vanishes, because then you're like, okay, I have this feedback now, but what do I do with it? So try to find a person who also like wants to engage themselves to implement it a little bit, help you out a little bit for a specific scene or a crucial moment. And I think that's the most thing I can say about feedback, like the most crucial tips for creators.
One additional thing, just before we move on, I think is really useful with this project is having a clear vision of what you want to achieve. And one of the first things I was taught as an editor at WEBTOON was to ask creators, what's your goal with this series? Or what's your goal with this project? And you get so many different answers. Someone will say, my goal is like, I want to tell a massive epic of this story that I've been working on forever, or I want to tell, a story that feels artistically satisfying and beautiful and large. And someone else's, I want to make people cry. That was a goal I heard very recently from a new creator, and I loved it. Knowing that kind of purpose can really help you with these edits, because it helps you filter to say, does this serve my goal? Big picture. Am I doing this for the right reasons, or am I doing this to meet the goals that I have in place? Really helps, and has helped us for sure.
Yeah, that was actually gonna be one of my questions too, is that Yaruno mentioned like maintaining your voice when telling your story despite feedback. And I think it sounds like it's kind of like a two-person editor. I think a two-person effort where like the creator knows what their voice is and the editor kind of helps to amplify that. Something else I was really curious about was, Yaruno, was there ever like a piece of feedback that you received, like a change that you decided to make that you were really intimidated by or that really scared you? And if so, like what was the result of that change or edit that you made to your series?
I'm gonna think about this. I think the scariest one that I also like slightly didn't agree with the most at the start was for episode 2. That was rather early on in the process, where it was suggested to have episode 2 start with some more narration, summarize episode 1 a bit more and to like spell out the stakes a bit more clearly, basically. And I thought like I understand where that's coming from. It's good to like establish the stakes clearly, give some more backstory on the main character and all that. But on the other hand, I felt like it feel maybe a bit like, to me it felt a bit weird to implement it in that way and like forced. But it did make me think in a different way about episode 2 than I was currently thinking. So I still learned a lot about it, and episode 2 now wouldn't be what it is without that piece of feedback, even though it wasn't followed identically. I did notice also that by eventually I think we also decided to rewrite a bit of the dialogue to make some of the concepts more clearly, because in a new series a lot of new words get thrown at you. Ty's power has to be explained. We use flair instead of power in the comic, so that has to be established so people aren't confused. And we noticed that just by changing some dialogue, I think it was only like 5 or 6 lines or something, but it was clear that like the concepts were were clearer explained. And that's something that Tyler is very good at, as helping me with dialogue, because like I'm not a native speaker of English, and I sometimes notice that my dialogue isn't to the point enough. Like the sentences are sometimes a bit clunky, and Tyler is really good at like cutting out the excess parts that don't have to be there while keeping the same meaning. And that's something that really helped throughout the series, and also for that example in episode 2.
Yeah, I also know that you prepared this entire presentation, which is amazing for this. I'd love to see a bit more about just like the revamping process. Like, what are some of those changes from Canvas to Originals that you made that you can show some of our viewers?
Yeah, well, I did a in-depth analysis basically of the second test. basically going over like what happens. So always on the left side is the canvas version, and on the right side is the original version. And the goal of the second test is basically I wanted Tai and Nerin to face off against each other in a test to add some tension between the main characters, but also Nerin is rather insecure, so she would feel guilty because if she wins, that means Tai loses and that he has more difficulty passing the test or something. So that was interesting character conflict, and that was basically the goal that I started at. And when you, for example, now compare the left to the right, they both have an establishing shot of the location and an establishing shot of the arena. But the left side is, I mean, it's more to the point, basically. It's like only the core points are there. Meanwhile, on the right side, on the first panel, you see two characters sweating. Why is that? Well, later it's revealed that their dad is present for the test. He is also a big time hero, so they're extra nervous because they know they'll be watched. Then the arena is introduced with a tiny joke, which also gives some spotlight to Hirsi, one of the side characters. And then the biggest change is, and that's between Canvas and original, is basically in the original, every test is hosted by one of the top 12 heroes in the world. So that means they also have to be introduced, and that gives the test much more identity. So it does take up a lot more panels, but it also adds a lot. So then after the location is introduced, the fight is introduced. Again, in Canvas, it was very straight to the point. I want the Tai and Nerin to fight. So what happens? They see they have to fight, Nerin stresses, and then they face off. That's it. It's like there's nothing fancy going on. It's just a basic arena, just a basic 1v1. That's it. In the original, it's basically the test takes place in a big maze where metal walls can like move up and down, and like it constantly changes. So it's much more dramatic here that suddenly a wall drops and then Tai and Nerin see each other and they realize, well, yeah, now we're opponents, so now we'll have to fight. So it's much more dynamic, and already the test is more involved with the process. So then the fight starts. I also took way more time here in Canvas. In Canvas, it's just Tai throws a punch. Nerin doesn't want to fight. She refuses to fight back because she doesn't want to beat Tai, and that's it. Again, in the original, takes some more time. Like, I didn't let my story breathe enough in Canvas. I was like, this is my idea. I want to go from A to B. So all I did was go from A to B as fast as I could in the story. And it often, like, it didn't really have a positive effect. Now I'd like to take my time more, expand on ideas as well. So after Nerin refuses to fight back, Tai notices that he isn't taking him seriously. So he gets angry at her, like he doesn't want her to lose the fight because he pities him or something. So he gets angry. There's a little conversation. Then Nerin has a thought process. She realizes, oh, I'm hurting his feelings. She gets ready to fight again. But again, it's way more dynamic. It's a bit longer to explore the characters. And then I think a big example as well, which I really liked, and it's such a small thing, but I'm really proud of it, is when the fight resumes. The problem is, so Tai's power is indeed, it's a healing power, but it's so strong that basically he can't ever grow physically stronger, because when you work out, your muscles get injured. So when that also instantly heals and reverts to the previous state, you can't grow stronger. So he's always weak. Meanwhile, Nerin has telekinesis, very strong power. So how would I ever have them fight? Well, Tai needs a distraction. In the Canvas, I was just thought, oh, there's sand on the ground. He can just throw sand, then try to go for a punch through the sand because she has bad vision. The problem is that doesn't really make it a fight, and Nerin is an active character. In the original, Tai loosens his shoe and he kicks it at her. Nerin has to block it using her flare, making it more likely that Tai is able to close in because he just already blocked an attack, so she is not ready for a next one. So the characters are more involved here in the action than in the Canvas version. And then the biggest change is like this entire part, basically a sort of round 2 in their fight, doesn't happen in the Canvas version, but it does here because, as I said earlier, the walls can constantly change. So suddenly during their fight, the walls change, and Tai is able to hide around a corner. Nerin is backed into a corner, and she doesn't know where he is. She doesn't know, is he on the left side, is he on the right side? An entire second round happens. Way more of their flair is being used. And eventually, again, the same goal is still being achieved. It's still Tai fighting versus Nerin, but it's just executed way better and like expanded on more. There's also like this cool part where then Nathan rips his arm off, and Tai tries to do a special move, but it doesn't work out here, sadly. And then the fight ends after a short talk, and then Nathan wins, able to smash him against the wall. So when you compare them, it's like the same things happen, but also they don't. This is a great example of what I mentioned earlier, where like the core concept is exactly, I mean, like the core goal and the story of why I did this is exactly the same, but the way you execute it is very different. Also, something that really helped, but that's not something I could really like show visually, is that in the original, because it's a giant maze, you can also cut to other of the side characters fighting. In the canvas, it's 1v1s and they happen sequentially. So whilst Tai and Nathan are fighting, no one else is fighting. But now in the maze, you can always cut to another shot of, oh, these characters are over here fighting as well. These characters are fighting over here. That makes it easier to pace the fight, to put breaks where you need them, and all that stuff. So it's basically the same idea, but expanded on a lot. This is also an example, exactly the same idea of a sequence. Also on the left side, it happens in episode 51 only in Canvas, and in original it happens in episode 4, because like I didn't really find my footing yet in Canvas, and only later on I decided, oh, it'd be cool to have like this sort of sequence, to have a fixed group of characters way later. Yeah, this is like some details with editor stuff, but we can go over that later because I already talked a lot. But basically, like the second test, I hope there were some good examples in there that show like how you can do the same idea, the same core concept, but like expand upon it more, make it more interesting by just like, yeah, like not really thinking about it more, but approaching the same idea from various angles and not just going from A to B as fast as you can, because that's not always the best way to write a scene.
Yeah, that's honestly it's incredible to see the difference from your Canvas version and your originals version. Sometimes like really slowing down your story and taking time with the storytelling. I'm curious, Tyler, when it came to executing that on the originals version of the story, what sort of advice or tips did you give to really help with really taking your time telling the story of Immortal Weakling?
Absolutely. Well, I think this fight is a good example of when you slow down, you're adding value if it's got the right emotional charge or import. In this case, we knew that this conflict between the title character, the weakling, and the quickly growing Naren was something we'd basically been implying from the start. We knew that this emotional conflict, too, was a big part of the story of how would they respond to a shift in their dynamic. So knowing that it already had as much importance and as much emotional weight as it did made us feel that this was the right place to expand. It was also good because, like Yaruno noted, it gave the character Naren time to make more decisions, to maybe agonize over how she would respond. So we teased out this conflict to give more justice to the characters, to allow us to really experience that sort of drama and that anguish, and going forward from there. We wouldn't slow down something that had less importance or less significance. And it just was a question for us of what do we want to see more? What did people connect with most as we explored finding the areas that deserved this attention?
Yeah, can you give some examples about where particular in this kind of fight scene did you guys decide to give more attention, and what kind of techniques did you use to really emphasize those parts?
Well, specific places. Naren has her back to a wall. Literally, she sees that she is cornered and doesn't have a choice. This is a really good physical expression of what was present in the Canvas version, where she was compelled to duel. In this case, she is now really, really required if she wants to go forward to confront him. And then we see things like she will do a relatively defensive maneuver of blocking and deflecting him, and that connects with his her strategic choices of trying to be a cautious fighter. But eventually Tai calls her out and is saying, like, you're clearly doing this beyond even the point of strategy and beyond the point of usefulness. And that almost see how one case of her being cautious is reasonable and justified, but by making a second case of her being cautious, we show this is over the top. She is doing too much in this case, and that hurts her friend Tai.
There's also one small thing we added is the scene where Ty's arm gets ripped off. That's something that doesn't have a payoff yet, but it is something that will foreshadow later events as well. So I basically, it's also again connecting multiple parts of the story into one. Instead of just having this fight for Ty and Nerin's emotional conflict, which is very important, we can also use it to foreshadow future events. There's always like little things to like put in there and extra things to add. But indeed, like Tyler said, this is one where we really wanted to have a longer confrontation, space it out a bit so the emotional value can also like click. Because in Canvas, the fight was, I think, like for example, this here is like there's no break in between as these 9-ish panels are sequential. However, in the original series, we had it stop here. So after Ty gets angry and explains himself, then we cut to a different scene, and then we return to Nerin making up her mind and thinking about the situation. So sometimes spreading out a scene is also about sometimes shifting to a different scene so the reader can take in the first part of the scene before it gets followed up by the second part of the scene. So like taking breaks in scenes is actually also still a part of that same scene, even though you cut to a different scene, which is a bit weird, but it's like there's all these things of pacing to think about. And that's a big difference between Canvas and original, because in Canvas we made 40 panels per month. I think we did 20 panel chapters every 2 weeks. But I know like readers already have to wait 2 weeks. I want to make sure that in the 20 panels as much happens as possible. And that's why I had a tendency to go from A to B as fast as possible. But now with originally we have more panels, we have more episodes, so there's more room to really deepen these issues. And that's something really cool to I'm still growing. Still learning how to use the space as efficiently as possible, how to add things and all that. And that's something that's really cool when making an original. Basically having more room and more space to explore the same story.
I really love hearing you both talk about your storytelling process because it almost feels like a science, like the science of storytelling. Like you're both just such professionals in this realm. Yaruno, I'd really love to hear, like you talked about so much about how you've improved and like the changes you made. I'm wondering, what are you most proud of when it comes to the changes you made in this originals version of your story?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think weirdly enough, for the viewers, this will be a bit sad because I can't show it yet, but I'm very excited about the next episodes that are going to come out after the break. I think episodes 22, 23, and 24 are some of my favorites in the entire part of the series so far. But in terms of changes, I think indeed this Ty versus Neren conflict is one I'm very happy about, the way it changed. The introduction as well. Especially, I'll just go, it's also a bit with Tyler's help, but the way this was basically in the first episode, there's this big reveal. Ty acts very tough, like he's the big hero and stuff, but the reader doesn't know yet that he is physically very weak. Of course, it's in the title, but it hasn't been shown yet. So when Ty lands his first punch, it's this big anticlimactic moment where it's just like, oh, he basically does no damage at all. So in Canvas, it was this very tightly paced, not really a good build-up or anticlimactic effect. I even put like very loud sound effect on there, even though the joke would be that there would be almost no sound because he has no physical power. But like the way that this changed eventually into this final version, where then like there's the cool smoke, there's the big pause, there's the reveal of that basically did nothing. That's also a lot thanks to Tyler, which you can see here with like the feedback. But like the first episode, when I read the Canvas first episode, I'm like, oh, I made so many mistakes. But even now still, when I look at this first episode, I'm like, that's a very good introduction, like a good way to start the series. It's tight, it's cool. There's also some humor in it, especially the organ joke from Neren. is fun because Ty has a lot of regeneration power, he constantly donates his organs to the hospital. So Neri looks at his medical file and she's like, "You donate 107 livers, 300 and something hearts." He's like, "What is going on?" And that's like, because the reader doesn't know his power yet either. I think that's a really fun joke. But yeah, to give a shorter answer, I think just the opening of the story is something I'm really proud of now compared to Canvas.
Yeah, talking a lot about the opening, I'm wondering, Tyler, like, what tips do you have in creating like a really good introduction and really hooking in creators with your first episode?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge a lot of people work on, and there's no single answer. I think part of it's going to come down to returning to the question of what is important to you and what your values are in this. I think also trying to guess at what readers are going to enjoy most about the series, and then saying, how can I get some of these most enjoyable elements in that first step? So an action series is probably going to have a fight because we love a fight. A romance, even though you're not going to have the kissing necessarily in the first episode, you might get some of that like blush or hand touch or something like that to really like get the reader going like, oh, I like this stuff. I really enjoy that. Giving a strong impression of often come down to one or two really distinct actions. Trying to distill is one of the major goals and one of the really verbs that I use most often in talking about it, because I'm always just like, what's the one way we can show who this character really is, or get this heart on the screen, or show that their conflict is going to be this kind of thing. And that just takes some experimentation. I think Canvas can be great for this. Maybe if you're trying a handful of different episodes or just publishing a few skits or bits of your characters, that might help you find something or thinks about your character. It is such a case-by-case challenge, but I do think that following your heart really in terms of what you love about the series and what you have enjoyed the most is going to be a really good guide. Knowing that you have enjoyed this element when you've been creating or daydreaming about your story, knowing what you enjoy when you read similar stories, that is going to guide you very, very well to the kind of story you want to create. So can't go wrong that way.
Yeah, I actually have another question for you, Runo. Like, when I was looking at your presentation, like, I noticed the kind of difference in character design between the Canvas version and the originals version. What kind of fueled those decisions in changing certain aspects of your characters?
Well, funnily enough, I'm not great at picturing characters in my head. So when I write them, I only care about the written part, and then I just give it to Siphon, and he just returned the most amazing design ever. And like when we moved to originals, he said like, yeah, I also want to like change up a few things about their design, because I just think it'll click better. And I was like, go ahead, like you always do amazing stuff. So I don't really, when writing, I always try to be as hands off as possible with the art, because Siphon interpreting what I write is much better than Siphon just writing like a robot. Like if he just drew what I wrote like a robot would, then the comic would not be as good as it. Like it would be, I think, 50% of as good, if not even less. Like the way he interprets what I write, the way we think about things together, is really what enhances the comic. Like I don't want an artist who just draws what I write. I want them to think about the character. Like Siphon also interprets the character. He often asks me questions like, if a character would do action A, what would their reaction be? Or if this would happen to them, how would they react? So he also wants to really get to know the character, and like together we explore them further, and then he, using his magical brain, turns that into an incredibly cool design for the characters. It is also a character design that we talked about with Tyler. But indeed, like Nathan and Ty did change a lot. I think they look a bit older in general as well. I really like the design upgrade. I like everything Siphon does, to be honest. Like he always returns magical designs and makes such good drawings. So yeah, I just let him be basically.
Actually, I have another question for you, Runa, regarding your introduction. Something Tyler talked a lot about regarding, hooking in readers is thinking about like what you love about your series and making sure that's portrayed in that first episode. What would you say are the things that you love about your series that you thought was super important to portray?
I think it is basically what I like a lot about Tai is that he like there's a lot of series, for example, even My Hero Academia is also, there's a weak character and he grows stronger. I mean, like basically all series are like that. But the thing with Tai is I wanted to put strict rules on him that he can never break. He will never grow physically stronger. Like I can promise that for the rest of the comic, he will never ever grow physically stronger. But he will certain ways to use his powers to grow. And that's basically, I think that's a good message for people. For in book in My Hero Academia, for example, it's like, oh, Deku gets the power from All Might, but without those powers, he wouldn't be able to do anything. So that feels like you need something extra to be special. Whilst I try to focus more on, you can use what's how you are. You don't have to change yourself. You just have to maybe like grow and change ways on, like work on how you use your skills, how you use your powers, basically. So I think it's a bit of a different perspective than usual superhero stories are. And that's something I really like. Basically, Tai's creativity, his overconfidence is also very funny to write. Like in episode 1 when he storms to the scene and acting like everything is okay, even though he is completely useless in the fight and actually doesn't do anything. But it's just like a message, like when you stay positive, when you work on yourself, when you grow, those are fun things. And also the thing about Tai's power growing, that's also why I'm very excited for the coming episodes, because that's when the first time it's really shown like how Tai starts getting around the lack of his power. But even here where you see the crocodiles, when he had to cross the crocodile river, it's like, oh damn, what do I do? And then just like, oh, I can just chop off my arm using a blade over here and just throw my arm over there and swim because my arm grows back. It's fine. So that's already like a way to show how you can use the skills that you have in an interesting way. And I also try to do this a bit with Nerin, but with Nerin she's basically the inverse of Tai. She has telekinesis. Telekinesis is basically a limitless powers. There are almost no rules for her. So in that way, Tai has all the rules, Nerin has no rules. But Nerin still has to grow slowly because she has to learn the power. She has to become more confident to use the power. She has to be creative with it. And that's stuff that she is lacking because of her insecurity. So in that way, Tai and Nerin are basically inverse. Tai is incredibly overconfident and Nerin is very insecure. Tai has a lot of restrictions put on him, and Nerin has basically no restrictions at all. And that's why I think they're an interesting duo to write and hopefully also to read about.
Yeah, honestly, that's so creative. The kind of story behind Tai and like how he, in a way, can't really grow stronger because of the limitations of his body. How did you come up with that concept?
Well, that was actually the first thing I made up about the series. Like I just had an idea after Glacia's a fancy comic of mine on Canvas. I thought, you know what, I want to try a superhero story. That could be fun. But then I had to know how would it be different from other superhero stories. So the first thing I wanted to figure out was what could the power of the main character be. And it was just when playing a video game and loading a save file, I had the idea, what if a character had basically the power that he has a save file. So Tai's flare in detail is basically at a certain time, which will get explained later, a save file is made. And when he gets damaged, he returns to that save file, always. So even when he does push-ups, for example, his muscles get a little bit damaged, returns to the save file, and he's weak again. That's why he can't grow stronger physically. He always returns back to the original point, basically, and there's nothing he can do about that. And that was the core concept. I didn't have a name. I didn't have any clue what the rest would be. I just knew this is a cool power, and I want to explore what I can do with it. And that's like how the entire series grew out of it.
Yeah, something else I wanted to ask you about is kind of that initial like process when you're first getting greenlit. How many episodes of your series did you already have out on Canvas, and like how was that just initial transition for you?
I think I'll check my files real quick. I think we were around 60, maybe. because now they're no longer up on Canvas. Oh, 75 apparently. So we were already going for quite a while. And then when moving to original, yeah, I just wanted to basically, like Tyler said, distill, take everything from those 75 episodes spread out, and then put it condensed or basically in the original version. For example, this scene over here is a good example of like how something from episode 51 gets moved way to the front, because I'm like, oh, I can already use that, and we just switch the order around and stuff. So that was actually an advantage we had, because we already had a lot of material. We already had quite a good idea of what we like. I had time to find my footing, basically. Like on Canvas, I was able to experiment a lot, and then I knew like, okay, I like this thing I did over here was good, this thing didn't work as much, and then basically could take together everything together. I see in the chat that people asked, the 75 episodes were 20 panels each, I think. And I think we published for I think 2 years, almost 2 years. We started somewhere 2019, February 2019. Yeah, I think so, somewhere over there.
Yeah, it sounds like you're already pretty far into your story when you were already telling it on Canvas. And I know that when you go to originals, there's so many changes that you made. How did you feel with having to kind of retell your story again? Was that like a challenge for you? Was that something you're excited about, especially since you've already gotten so far?
I was actually incredibly excited, because for two reasons. The first one being that I already noticed a few mistakes, things that could have been better in earlier episodes. So I was really glad that I could upgrade those. And other things were, I was really excited because I already knew what would happen, like where I wanted to go. So I could include more foreshadowing, build up better towards it. For example, I don't know if there's anyone who has read this series on Canvas, but there's like a brother and a sister who have a big rivalry, and that happens more later on. But now I can already include like little hints of their rivalry way earlier, because I already know it's going to happen. Basically, I already had a blueprint of certain key points I wanted to go to, and that's also when I handed in my pitch document. I think I had 8 different files. I think they totaled over 30 pages together. I wrote way too much. I am rather certain not a single editor read all of it because it was way too much. But I did enjoy like planning everything, because I had I had an outline. Yeah, it was actually a big gift to already have been that far ahead, because like I could just take the best of what I already made and upgrade it even more. That's something YouTubers often, when they look at their first video, they think like, oh, I changed so much. But the advantage they have is that every video is a new thing. But comics are sequential, so you always go back to that start. And that's why having the option to like upgrade the entire series from the very start was something I really liked. I was really excited about. So I never really had the feeling that I missed out on stuff or regretted having to start over. It was mostly like, and that's something I still have, is looking forward to moments I know will happen in the future. Because I know I'm working towards this, I'm working towards that, and makes me really excited for the original version and seeing it progress and grow and eventually get to where the Canvas version was.
I saw Tyler's face when you mentioned the 30-page story explanation. Did you read all those 30 pages, Tyler?
I read the pages, but it took a while, and it was a while ago. But we came in with a lot of material, I think is absolutely true. And finding from it the best and most exciting parts was a major advantage and gift to our production process. We just knew we had so much to work from that there was no shortage of things to consider.
Yeah, I think something that I'm curious about is, like, you talked about how now that you were able to restart, you could foreshadow the story. What tips do you have for successful foreshadowing? How do you give hints without giving too much away or too little?
Foreshadowing is really difficult, especially when building up to a twist. You don't want readers to be able to predict a twist, because then it's no longer a twist. So it's always a crucial balance to like draw slight hints, but you have to basically trust that your reader is smart. You never want to over explain something to them or really put something like way too much in their face, because they're smart. They have read more comics. You're not inventing the wheel. Like, they know what you're doing. So you have to make it sneaky, and you have to trust your readers that they'll pick up on those little hints. And even if they don't, like, you have to make sure that your twist also still works without people over analyzing your comic for the next 5 years so that they examine every pixel, basically. Like, it has to be a good balance between not being too obvious but having some hints thrown in. For example, on the presentation, for example, this panel, you just see the two of them, they look a bit nervous, then they dish out classic rivalry. But the reader knows, like, okay, they're bickering, that always happens, but they look a bit nervous now. Like, why would they be nervous? Normally they're more arrogant, they're more energetic, and that's just like a tiny hint, and this is not leading to a big twist or something, but it is like a tiny hint to show people like something is kind of off. And that's enough. Like, people will pick up on those hints, especially if you like spread them out a bit. You also don't want to put every hint in the same episode or something. You like try to spread them out a bit, slowly build up to it, and then like hopefully it should pay off. But like executing twist is always difficult. So the key is planning in advance by a lot. Like I think even one of those 8 documents was in rough outline until season 4 or something. Likely when writing the next seasons, I probably won't follow that outline anymore. But all those ideas are still in my head. So I'm still like thinking, what are the key moments? How do I build up to them? So make sure you plan ahead enough. And that's something I didn't do on Canvas and kind of regret as well. I often had a feeling like, oh, I have to change something here last minute. And then it's in the story, it's a little bit weird. Like, I introduce characters not totally out of nowhere. I do give an explanation to it, but it's not organic, basically. And if you plan ahead further, you can make everything organic. You can introduce it in a normal, non-suspicious way, basically. Because if you do something all of a sudden, the readers will be extra suspicious because, again, they know stories, they read stories. So you got to make sure that everything grows organic and nothing sticks out too much, because if it does, then your twist could possibly be ruined already.
Do you have any
And
tips,
I think that's
Tyler?
about it.
Well, we were saying it a bit in the chat, but someone seeing your twist coming is often a compliment to your work because you built to that great point. You can definitely have varying degrees of surprise. I don't know if you'll ever fully surprise everyone, but you are giving readers the chance to engage deeply or not and figure out for themselves something to get to that point. So really, I don't stress about the surprises too much. I just want to make sure that it's a fun time getting there.
Yeah, so we don't have much time left. We're almost in the last few minutes of this workshop. So I want to end on a positive note. So I'd love for you guys to end with talking about your favorite things about working with each other.
Well, I can go first. A big part of what's so fun about Immortal Weakling is the imaginativeness. And Yaruno has so many ideas, and I love seeing the unique takes on powers, the silly takes on training. There's a bit I love where Ty and Aaron are working together on their powers, and it doesn't go great, but it's amazing for the readers. So that's all we need. I think that inventiveness is great. I think the heart is really true in the story. I really admire storytellers who care about their characters and can even be defensive of them when you make a suggestion or say, what if we do something like this? Because Yaruno wants to say, like, we got to do right by them. We got to, respect them. We got to respect their heart, their motivations. It is great to have an advocate for the character and for the story, and for the readers too. Sometimes in the notes, we'll be talking a lot about trying to predict what readers will think or how they'll do it. And we just come down to saying, I think they're going to have fun with this, and we're going to move forward. And that's something Yaruno will just say, like, this is going to be fun. You got to trust me on this. It's going to be a good time. And we move forward from there. I think that kind of willingness to negotiate and listen is so valuable, as is knowing that you've got your characters' backs, you've got your readers' backs, you're thinking about these things, valuing them so much. So that's what I enjoy the most.
For me, I think it's mostly the thing that I don't have to stress when writing. Often when writing by myself, I would think like, when I finish this script, that's the final version. But now I know Tyler's gonna have a look at it. So the stress is way lower. I know if a sentence isn't worded correctly, Tyler is there as a support always. Like even if I mess up a little bit, he'll point it out and everything will be fine. And that makes me be able to work way faster because I don't have to worry about everything being perfect, because I know that Tyler will also have a look at it. And the thing that Tyler said about wanting to stay true to the characters for the fans is also something that I really like about Tyler. Tyler never tries to force me to change the story or like force his own ideas in. He's just always very open. He also understands the characters very good. Like he knows what I'm going for. And that's just incredible to work with, basically. It's like it makes writing so much easier for me. So that's really, really nice. I never have to worry. And that's actually just the best part. Like there's almost no stress when writing because I know Tyler is there to back me up as well.
Hey man, I really enjoy this. We're talking a lot about this, but thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, it has been. Thank you.
Wow, my heart's so warm. Thank you so much to the both of you for sharing. That made me so happy to hear. So thank you to the both of you for taking the time to be a part of this. Tyler, thank you. I know you're kind of recovering from a cold. There are times where I was like, Tyler, get some water. But thanks for sticking it out. I'm so happy you could join us. Yaruno too. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye all.